Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Steve Swink. He's going to talk to us a little bit about his new game, Scale, which is one of our showcase games on the laptops. Take it away, Steve.
Hey, everybody. All right, heads up. I'm going to demo just a little bit. That's mild swell of applause. Thank you. Very generous. All right. So no one's really paying attention, so I'll just kind of do a little demo, and then if anyone has any questions, we can do that, and we can get back to the drinking and a tournamenting. So it's a very simple idea. You scale things up and down as a mechanic. Drop things through the world. So this is a good illustration of why physics engines really hate to have things scaled up and down, but also why this is kind of interesting and compelling as a gameplay mechanic, I think, and has some potential. This is like a sweet car or whatever. This is playable on all these machines if you want to, although things are relatively early. Things are a little broken. As I said, physics engines are not too fond of having things dynamically scaled. They're all built with the assumption that you're not going to do that. I don't have too much more to show than I showed at GDC last year. But anyway, so here's a house, and I've scaled it up. You can walk around inside it. And eventually there'll be a bunch of furniture and stuff in here. And up here in the back bedroom, the plan is to have a bed and a nightside table and a dollhouse on the nightside table. And you can pick up the dollhouse and you can walk outside with it and put it down and then scale down this house and scale up the dollhouse. And then if you take this tiny house that you've just made and put it inside the now giant dollhouse, that's the solution to the puzzle. So that sort of gives you a flavor of what the game will be about. Although I'm kind of thinking that, hey, you know, I don't necessarily need to make this a puzzle game, and my thinking's been really upside about it in general. And I'm constantly trying to shoehorn this mechanic into puzzles, but when I just put it in front of people, they just kind of want to play with it. And so I'm sort of thinking that all I really want to do is just look for the things that people want to do and reinforce those.
How long have you been in production on this game, Steve?
I don't know. If you put together all the time I've worked on it, it's probably something like 2 months. But it's been over the course of a couple of years or something like that. So I have a huge backlog of ideas that I want to get to. So some of this stuff is a little bit more rudimentary. You know, it's sort of like you put down the 2 buttons with the one thing, and that opens the thing over here. I think there's some interesting stuff here. So it's, you know, it has to be big enough to push down the switch. It's pretty straightforward stuff.
You talked about trying to find where it is on the sort of continuum of between sandbox and puzzle game. It sounds like you're getting a lot of people testing it out, playing it at various events that you've taken it to. Have you ever considered just maybe making an area that seems to you impossible to pass, then letting a bunch of people play it, and then seeing if there's a solution and calling that a puzzle?
This thing that I'm doing right now is actually that.
Oh, rad.
I just made this at E3 while people were playing the game, and then people solved it. I mean, I figured it was probably solvable. It's just a little bit annoying. One thing I didn't realize is that because these are mushrooms, when you scale them up, they scale you away from the thing, from the side of the thing you're trying to climb up, so that becomes sort of an interesting puzzle. There's a lot of stuff like that in this, and I feel like I just need to go through and see what wants to happen with the design and just kind of reinforce that for the player and not worry too much about shoehorning a bunch of pre-canned ideas into what's here. I just need to sort of make what's here more stable so that people can experiment freely and not have things break on them.
That's one of the cool things about games that, you know, have some physics to them is you can find puzzles as opposed to just having to pull them fully formed out of your ass.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'd say that's one of the strengths of games in general, right? You can just sort of make something and then see what people want to do with it, and then it becomes not just yours, but theirs and yours, which is sort of the beautiful thing about having people play a game that you've made.
Did you explain a little bit about how the scaling up and scaling down? There's kind of like like almost like a mass allowance where you can grow something by how much you've shrunk something else. Or is that am I understanding that correctly?
No, yeah, that's correct. So there's a finite amount of this sort of scale juice in the world that you can suck out of various objects. So you can scale things up quite large, but you have to pull that mass out of some other object first. So that's how, as a designer, I'm able to sort of control what's happening here. Although in some of the later levels, I get a little crazy with that. So, there's sort of simple things that you can do that physics-based. So, I could climb up on that rock to get up to there. And then I started to get into things like this, which is pretty fun. You get some objects that are moving, and you can sort of do that. And if you scale them small enough, fast enough, or scale the other one up. So if I scale that up, it just sort of crashes into the wall there, which is interesting. Okay, so then those two miss each other, and they're going to hit those two switches, which then will open this thing, and I can get in there.
Do you envision the game at some point growing like a sort of story around it? Do you have like internally, have you thought of like an explanation for what you're experiencing in it?
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of things in mind, but of course, you don't know if any of that stuff's going to work until you try it. So I got to try a bunch of things, and then I can talk more about what the narrative wants to be. I mean, again, I think, you can really go overboard with narrative, but you kind of have to remember what's interesting about the game to begin with, or what seems to be interesting. I'm not necessarily, as the creator, 100% in tune with what's super interesting about it until I put it in front of people. Like, I have ideas. Like, I think this is really interesting. So I'm on a piece of land right now, and if I scale it really large and I start to walk, it takes me a really long time to get across this. But if I scale it way down, I can just run all the way across it, and then I can sort of transport myself quickly from place to place by doing that. So that seems really interesting, and so I need to find an interesting way to emphasize that. Of course, there's like a little crack in the wall that I can walk through, kind of thing. Stuff like that. And then this is sort of the last test level that I had to show. So this is kind of a Grand Canyon looking kind of thing. And in this world, you can scale up and down the entire world. So I can just like scale the entire world down and then leap over and scale it back up. And I think that has a lot of mileage. Like, there's a lot of interesting things I can do with that, because it sort of warps time as well as space. So it'd take me forever to walk across this whole desert, but if I just scale it down, then I can just sort of boink, get up on top of this giant mountain. And obviously this is all sort of placeholder art.
I don't know, I kind of like the art. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with dark, but there's a sort of spiritual boredom that you get from a whole lot of visual sameness, and I think a lot of games have started to look this, especially at least mainstream games have started to look very much the same. So it's always nice to see colors.
Yeah.
And also
anyway.
giant oranges.
So that's most of what I have to show right now. I mean, plans for the future are basically just continue to make a giant sandbox, play around with it, and make things that are interesting and fun to mess around with.
What was this built in? Is this Unity?
Yeah, it's built in Unity.
Yeah.
So at some point I may have to make some sort of special physics plugin for Unity that allows dynamic scaling without things just totally dying performance-wise or getting all glitchy and freaking out. But yeah, in the future, I'd like to do a lot of like crazy nested recursion kinds of things. And I have some sort of high concept ideas that lead to what I think are interesting ideas for sort of world modifiers. So, for example, I thought it would be interesting to have a riff on sort of the idea of the Platonic ideal form. Plato had this idea that there's a perfect size for everything. There's a perfect form of a horse. And a physical instantiation of a horse, like a horse that you see, is always an imperfect representation of that perfect form. And if you're a true philosopher of nature, you can see the perfect form underlying everything, and that's how you gain true knowledge. I just thought it would be interesting to make it so that every object in one of these worlds has sort of a perfect size, and if you try to deviate from that size, the object always wants to shrink back to that size, and that seems like it would have a lot of interesting effects. And, like there's that world where everything scales when you scale one object. Well, it'd be interesting to sort of invert that, so you scale one object down and all the other objects in the world scale up. Stuff like that. things that I'm interested in pursuing. They're not necessarily cheerful, but they're not like dark and edgy. It's just kind of like I think this would be interesting, so I want to pursue that. And maybe it's just way too high concept for a game about scaling things up and down. But I think that you can appreciate it at both levels. I think you could have that underpinning, and people never get that, but that was the motivation behind it.
Sounds cool to me. Do we have any questions from the floor? Does anybody want to talk to Steve about scale? Let me get to the microphone over here.
So I was just wondering, are you handling collision detection in any way? Like, can an object get so big that it pushes other objects off of the platform?
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely can.
Is there any sort of priority? Like, how do you determine when something might have the ability to push something else off and otherwise just not interact with other objects?
The general rule of thumb is if the object is more massive, it will push the other one. So if I do this, it will sort of push the other one off there. Well, it pushed it a little bit, not all the way off though. You can also kind of do stuff like this, which is pretty fun.
Nice, thanks.
Sorry, when they scale, does the mass scale? Yeah. So I just launched that one way up into the air.
One of the things about first-person shooters is you're always kind of this sort of non-existent camera walking around. But if you think about it, you too could be an object in this universe. Did you ever think about turning the gun on yourself?
Yeah, I had a few sketches for mirror levels and stuff like that. Although there are a couple of other games that are doing scaling stuff that are all about scaling the player.
Yeah.
The Dilating Pupil and Spectre Spelunker come to mind. So games like that. I mean, I think they have that covered pretty well, and I think that actually works better in 2D. Because although it would be really interesting to make a level about the fact that you can't tell the difference if you're in first person, if the world is shrinking, or if you're growing, or vice versa. Like, you can't really tell the difference. So it'd be interesting to play off of that and see what kind of interesting gameplay comes out of that. I'm writing a giant butterfly.
It definitely seems like the fast traveling by growing the thing that you're walking on is a super novel mechanic. I haven't seen anything like that before. Do we have any other questions for Steve? Steve will be around, presumably, to talk about the game. It is installed on all the laptops. If you have any problems playing it for any reason, just come find a volunteer. Do you have a question? No? All right. Thank you very much, Steve. We're going to set up MegaGurp here shortly, so we'll all have an opportunity to make fools of ourselves